In the last couple of days, I decided to discover how many really hard jumps there actually were in Geometry Dash. And oh boy, my mind was blown. Before creating this list of jumps going from really easy to extraordinarily hard, I thought levels like these, also known as the world's hardest jumps, were the actual hardest jumps in the game. But I was very wrong. The jumps I found will be categorized in 6 different categories: beginner, normal, hard, insane, extreme, and the impossible category. Each jump getting harder the further we go on. Now let me show you the bizarre jumps I found. Our first category is the beginner category, and to start off, let's check out the easiest possible jump you can make. This is a level that looks really hard, but looks can be deceiving. All you need to do here is hold, making this only a bit challenging if you don't have any hands. A little harder is this jump with a red orb that makes you jump high into the air. Being attached to the player who like this can easily jump over this extremely tiny spike. Similar in difficulty is this world record holding smallest jump ever made, and the least tight spaces for the cube, robot and UFO game modes. It still is extremely easy, so let's speed it up a bit. All these jumps, respectively from left to right, take the 7th, 8th and 9th spot in difficulty. It's finally getting a little tricky, a double spike at normal speed. And don't ask me why I completed it only 99 out of 100 times. By the way, there also is another version of the cube. A mini version with a smaller jump range. It makes an entry with a simple jump. To finalize this category, we finish with both a triple spike that's squished together and a triple spike with these lower types of spikes. From here, we move up the medium category with jumps that are a little challenging, some of which you probably aren't expecting. As an example, for this jump you need to click in the middle of this block to hit a trigger that reverses your gravity and lets you beat the level. The second entry in this category is a jump most of us are familiar with. The quadruple spike in electrodynamics, but it still is pretty easy because of the fast speed. Let's move on from an insane difficulty level to an extreme demon. Black Blizzard is known for its hard timings, but also has some really easy parts. This jump, for example, where you need to keep holding to not crash on a staircase, is doable, just do not time it too late. On spot number 16 we finally got the famous normal triple spike, and just a little bit harder, the triple spikes from Michigan, since you can die at these top spikes too. The same quadruple spike from the level Electrodynamics makes it back on the list, but instead of triple speed being used, now double speed is being used, making the jump a little bit harder. A jump between 2 blocks looks really hard, but it isn't that bad. Grains of Sand is a spam level where you need a lot of consistency. It has hundreds of clicks, making the level really hard to do. One click from this level though, not really. Up next we got a 7 block gap for the robot and a 6 block gap for the tinier version of the robot. A large robot jump exploiting a bug that makes it jump really high into the air over this huge spike here, and a 1 frame per second jump that can be easily done consistently when playing normally. However, an actual interesting jump is this 3 block high wall. A cube can usually only jump 2.5 blocks high, but when jumping on the very edge of this block on 0.5 times speed, the cube can go over the structure. We also got a jump that can only be done when actually jumping on this yellow pad, and a tiny bit tougher, a block jump where you have to time your click late to avoid the deadly block above you. Before we get into the next category, we have the 3 block high jump from before on 1 time speed. It's only possible on a specific spot in the editor and not super hard to do. Time to get into the hard category, where I talk about jumps that are way tougher than before, and this is where stuff starts to get real. Before I talk about the first one, let me explain a very important term that will be used more and more from now on: a frame perfect jump. A frame perfect jump means that a jump is only possible in the duration of a single frame. On 60 frames per second, for example, a frame perfect jump means that you can jump on 1 out of these 60 frames. And on 1000 frames per second, you can jump in 1 out of these 1000 frames, meaning it's way harder. Let's call these frames per second the shortened term FPS for now. Let's continue with the video. A bit harder than a regular triple spike is a triple jump pad jump, due to them having wider hitboxes. But let's move on to one of the most famous extreme demons called Bloodbath. At the end of it, there's a triple spike, which seems to be the only route you can take. But if you look closely, you can take another route where you jump at the end of the block at the right time. And even though it's a harder route, it's definitely a cooler route to take. A similar level is Love Baba, a meme level made by Zobros. At the end of it, there's one really long jump that's tough to do, and I was able to pass it a bit more than half of the times I attempted it. We are now passing the barrier where I filled the following jumps more than I passed them. This ball jump needs you to time your jump very late, since the later you jump in it, the further you get launched to pass these 5 spikes. Among Us jump by Amazing Thump looks relatively simple, but you need to jump on the corner of this block here to pass the Amogus. Stereo Madness is the first level of the game, being very easy. But what about this extreme version of Stereo Madness, where you need to perform a jump on the very corner of this block with barely any room to spare? Brutal. We talked about the gap jumps from both types of robots before, but this isn't the furthest block jump you can do with them. For the normal robot game mode, you can cover an 8 block jump, and for the tiny version you can cover a 7 block gap, which is a little bit harder. However, this huge spike here is even worse, with 18 attempts out of 100 being victorious for all these 3 game modes. This level, its first jump, is really odd. From this angle it looks impossible, but you can actually jump between these 2 blocks, which is pretty hard. Similar in difficulty, a spike pillar, a spike on top of a block on 0.5 times speed. At the start of the video, a jump with this tiny cube game mode was used, but instead of a single spike, 2 spikes are now used. The following jump is barely even visible. This blue orb very lightly has to be clicked right away when hitting the blue pad that reverses your gravity, or you'll die to these spikes. For the next 3 jumps, we have the world's hardest UFO, world's hardest spider, and world's hardest robot. On number 48 we got this tight orb jump between 2 spikes, but now we finally get to something special. World's hardest jump. But why is it only on spot 49 out of 100? Well, even though being named world's hardest jump, it isn't by light years, since way harder stuff has been created that leaves this jump in the dust. As a nice introduction to this, we have a single jump from the level 8 jumps of hell. In this level there are 8 almost frame perfect 144 FPS jumps, which is pretty damn hard. The next jump wasn't even meant to be possible. A ball challenge made by Woolsey supposedly had an impossible lost gap in it. On 60 FPS however, this gap became possible, even though still being pretty hard. The greatest height both versions of the cube game mode and the robot game mode can jump to are pretty remarkable, even though it still isn't that bad in comparison with most stuff that comes after this. At normal speed, it's known that a quadruple spike is impossible to pass. However, it can be done imperfectly by placing some spikes a little bit close to one another, being around the same difficulty as one jump in the 8 jumps of hell level. For the next 2 entries we have these jumps, and on the 2 spots after these we have 2 other 60 frames per second frame perfect robot jumps for both the tiny version and normal version of this game mode. A 60 frames per second frame perfect means you have around 0.014 seconds to react in time. The hardest block gap on this list is a 5 plus 9/15 block gap for the cube, the maximum distance a cube can jump. And to finalize this category, we finish with the Polargeist jump skip. You can only do this when holding, since when holding you can get a little more momentum and pass this jump. Let's get into the insane category where most of this stuff is really difficult. Something that still was kind of doable is a robot jump in a level named Lotus Flower, a top 33 extreme demon known for its weird jumps. This jump needs to be done perfectly to not hit any blocks or spikes. An even harder extreme demon is called Unknown. At 11% there's an odd timing of a triple spike. If you time it too late you'll fall into a spike pit below it, and if you jump too early you will die to these spikes. So instead you need to perform a jump that makes you land on the very edge of this block, after which you need to hold to succeed. The hardest straight fly ever done is the Challenge Cerulean GR, only completed by 1 person so far. Every single click needs to be done perfectly here at a click rate of 6 clicks per second, meaning all those 6 clicks in 1 second need to be absolutely perfect. And even though not really being a jump, a single click here gets into the insane category. Back to world's hardest jumps again. World's hardest ship click, swing copter click and wave click were so hard that I was only able to do them once at most. But the hardest out of all these ones probably is world's hardest click. There isn't too much info about it, just that it's a frame perfect and also being harder than world's hardest wave, since you need to release in this version too. The next 2 jumps are both 144 FPS frame perfect, meaning you have 0.0069 seconds to jump at the right time. Even harder is a frame perfect jump looking like this, also known as a real life jump, which is a jump buffed to absolute perfection. Once upon a time, someone named 2QQ saw the world's hardest jump I mentioned before and decided to buff it even more. A single jump in this level called Sir Isaac Newton is frame perfect on 360 FPS. A micro click is a click where you need to very slightly tap your mouse to do a tiny click. A level named Robot Frame Perfect has a click like that in it, where you need to do an insanely small jump to pass this gap at exactly the right time, and out of 100 attempts I failed 100 times. Level Unnamed Zero surpassed the difficulty of the previous jumps by having a 555 FPS frame perfect in it. An impossible level named HMSCS and some other letters has some timings in it that no human could ever do. One jump at 11% however is possible to do, even though very unlikely. To jump between these two blocks, you have to perform a 666 FPS frame perfect. The person who uploaded this level was named FNM04, and he did something even more impressive. A 1000 FPS frame perfect jump, meaning you only have 0.001 seconds to react to it in time. The number one hardest possible level in the game is called Cyclo-Sig. The first click in the very first jump is a 1900 FPS frame perfect. But let's quit with these high FPS numbers and let's move on to the final jump on this list that was actually done by a human. The level VSC Verified looks extremely easy, but don't let its looks deceive you. All these wave clicks need to be performed perfectly to unlock the final jump. It's been done by around 100 players. Before we move into the extreme category, this jump right here looks like it's non-existent, even when you turn the hitboxes on, which should make the jump visible. However, this isn't the case. There is a frame perfect jump in this level, but you can't even see where it is, so it has to be done by complete luck. Time to move into the second to last category, the extreme category, where we discuss jumps that are technically possible but have never been done by anyone in the game. Tax Evasion is the number 2 hardest level on the impossible levels list. A list made for the hardest levels. It showcases some jumps that surpass what a normal human is capable of, and one of them is the second jump in the level, a 1440 FPS frame perfect. However, not only is this jump a frame perfect, you have to click and release in the same frame, which means you can only hold your mouse button for max 0.0006 seconds. This jump right here takes the second spot in this category, even though not looking too bad. First you jump, then hit a blue orb that switches your gravity, immediately hit it again to make gravity normal again, hold a little to perform a bug that makes you shake a little in the air and release. This all has to be done in less than a tenth of a second. A single click in this level called Rain is even harder, a 6828 FPS frame perfect, and that's not all. On this high FPS, you perfectly need to click with 2 keys at exactly the same time to hit a black orb, which moves you down, and do a jump which moves you up. Only then this UFO jump can be performed correctly. I talked about the first click in Cyclo-Sig before, done on 1900 FPS, but the actual jump is way harder. To not die to a soul that spawns when you do the jump at the right time, you have to click not once, not twice, but 3 times, all at the same time perfectly. Nobody has ever gotten close to doing this. The second highest FPS frame perfect on this list is a death jump. A former world record holding jump for being the hardest jump in the game, being a 200,000 FPS frame perfect. Dozens of times harder is a singular Formosa jump. For a jump like this, you need to click, release and click with another button all at the same time in one frame at 20,000 FPS. To show how absurd this is, you have 0.05 milliseconds to do all of these clicks at once. The same time it takes light to travel only 15 kilometers. However, the hardest humanly possible jump is made by Scop. He created a 9 million FPS frame perfect jump, where you have 0.000007 seconds to pass the jump. Now it is time for our final category, the impossible category, each entry getting more and more inhumane. The first entry is really weird. A 100 block high wall without anything extra added. This normally would not be possible, but with a bug where you need to change your game's FPS when inside one of these blocks, you can technically climb up the wall without any problem. Another possibly possible impossible thing is a full 4-spike jump that I showed before, at 0.5 times speed. This hasn't been tested yet, but with a bug called the exposition bug, you can potentially pass the jump. Something actually impossible is this 340 undecillion FPS frame perfect, meaning you have 0.0000000000 etc. 3 seconds to jump. This number is so huge that the current game can't handle the huge amount of FPS needed to even attempt this jump at this FPS. YouTuber Sky once made a layout that looks impossible, and a lot of it really is. Especially the very final jump where you need to do 51 clicks all at once, after which you immediately need to release all these 51 inputs at the same time. So unless you have 51 fingers, this is not humanly possible. A 1 million FPS frame perfect was once made by Trollin. It is impossible because it's unopenable. Joe White is the creator of the tightest wave part that I've ever seen. In this image you can see a blue part and a brown part. For the blue part you need to do 75 million FPS frame perfects, and for the brown part 57 billion FPS frame perfects. Even harder than a single click in this level though is a single click in the level Nessus. You need to click 330,000 times in a single jump. A void jump is a jump done under the ground. Normally you can't pass this ground under any circumstances. However, if you make a gap that is literally as tight as you can make it with hacks, the game will force your FPS to skyrocket to a number that's extremely high. 822 quatordecillion FPS to be exact. Because of this crazy amount of FPS, something called precision loss will occur and the jump will be under the ground, an unreachable place. This is speculation however. PPL Live is the hardest physically possible level in GD right now, or so it was meant to be. The very final jump, a 621 FPS frame perfect jump, is actually impossible to perform without the usage of any hacks. It doesn't matter how hard you try, without no clip it's game over. Our final hardest jump is a jump where you need to jump over the entire editor since everything is covered in spikes. Easy. I hope you enjoyed and be sure to subscribe. Goodbye.